Mark Twain once asserted that history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes, and so historians constantly attempt to draw parallels between events of modernity and those that have already gone by. In this vein, we turn to the ancient world and cast our gaze back to one of the many years that rival 2020 in its dubiously notorious status in the human imagination. When the year 536 AD began, just short of 1.5 millennia ago, the Eurasian civilizations that often serve as the subject of our videos were undergoing a seismic change. As war, politics, and other human regularities continued apace, a number of debated cataclysms occurred, which according to some scholars made 536 the worst year in all of history. Sometimes a certain source is not translated into English, but thankfully the sponsor of this video is right there to help you learn more than 10 languages. Our authors used Babbel to improve their knowledge of Russian, Turkish, and Spanish, which allowed us to gain valuable perspectives from the sources in these languages. Learning a new language is instrumental in earning more money professionally, in communicating with family and loved ones, it's essential for travelers, and for building human connections. It's also great for self-improvement and mental health, as being bilingual improves cognitive functions and memory. Babbel teaches using real-life situations and is a proven method of grasping a new language in 3 weeks via fun classes that last 10 to 15 minutes. Lessons are created by 150 real language teachers, not a machine or computer, which makes them lively and effective. It's a full learning ecosystem where you can decide how you want to learn, be it podcasts, interactive games, and much more. And it works. Studies have shown that 15 hours of Babbel is as good as a semester of college Spanish. A special offer for our viewers: buy 6 months of Babbel and get 6 months free. Click the link in the description for more information. Byzantine historian Procopius faithfully accompanied his generalissimo master Belisarius on the latter's conquests of both Africa and Italy during the 530s, observing the great general's achievements firsthand and then recording them for posterity. But in the midst of this imperial reclamation attempt, the chronicler described a phenomenon which is easy to pass off as irrelevant, but which might just be the clue to the most important episode in late antiquity. Writing almost certainly in 536, the 10th year of Justinian's reign, the Belisarian historian stated, "It came about during this year that a most dread portent took place. For the sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon, during this whole year, and it seemed exceedingly like the sun in eclipse, for the beams it shed were not clear, nor such as it is accustomed to shed. And from the time when this thing happened, men were free neither from war nor pestilence nor any other thing leading to death." Armed with a scientific understanding of the world, even we might peer up to the heavens with unease if we witnessed our sun blotted out for an entire year, as though the world had suffered through some devastating nuclear war. With our own reactions in mind, we can barely comprehend how shocking this apocalyptic sun haze was for the religiously minded people of the 6th century. It might have been seen as a herald of the end of the world, and to many it certainly came to feel like it. Because the observations of Procopius and several other historians of this period lack any form of explanation regarding the mysterious clouds, most likely because they had absolutely no idea what was happening, the cause long remained an elusive mystery, puzzling modern historians who attempted to glean anything from the ancient sources. However, by utilizing precise modern dating techniques such as ice core analysis and dendrochronology, the exact cause of what some scholars ominously call the 536 event can be deduced. When studying the cross-section of pine and oak tree rings within the Altai Mountains, as well as other places within the Northern Hemisphere, a trend of abnormally little growth exists beginning at the exact spot which can be cross-referenced and calibrated to represent around 536. This indicates a degree of uncharacteristic cooling, but doesn't suggest a cause by itself. To supplement this knowledge, ice cores extracted from Greenland and Antarctica, dated to around 536, contain strangely large sulfate deposits, volcanic glass, and sulfuric acid content. Laboriously weaving all of this disparate data, the biblical dimming, the widespread cooling, abnormal chemical content, and more, into one coherent tapestry, most scientists combing over the 536 event ascribe responsibility to a catastrophic volcanic eruption which might have even exceeded in severity the explosion of Tambora in 1815. As an aside, it is worth noting that the latter eruption also caused visual phenomena vaguely similar to those described by our ancient sources, such as hazy but beautiful yellow skies represented in 19th century art. Several locations for this impactful volcanic eruption have been put forward everywhere from Iceland to El Salvador, but that is a detail it would be pointless to get caught on. The issues of where and what are still unresolved, while some fringe researchers go as far as decrying the volcanic perspective altogether, instead pointing to certain residues in the historical record as evidence for a particularly violent comet strike. We will assume the dominant eruption theory is correct, keeping in the back of our minds the possibility of wrongness. Whatever happened, and however it happened, the results were striking in their magnitude. Unfortunately, convenient trade winds carried the ashy blanket across Europe and then Asia, blocking the sun's light and causing temperatures to nosedive by an average of between 1.5 and 2.5 degrees Celsius. According to some estimations, the consequence was the worst shock to Earth's ecosystem in the last 2,000 years, and the advent of the coldest decade in 2300. The effect on human society was no less devastating. Crop failures and dead harvests were endemic across the entire Eurasian landmass, a fatal thing for the chieftaincies, empires, and kingdoms who primarily relied on agriculture to feed their people and raise much-needed taxes. In the southern part of pre-Viking Norway, for example, the entire settlement structure and social organization completely collapsed. Farms were left behind, rich burials became rare, pottery production ended, and iron production decreased. In some areas, burial finds after this event were 90 to 95% lower than before. Denmark, Estonia, and particularly Ireland display alarming disruptions in the production of bread and the attending collapse of local societies. We have little evidence to prove this, but if one reads between the lines of the evidence we do have, it can be inferred that there was human starvation and suffering on a mass scale. The same famine, exacerbated by Justinian's war in Italy, supposedly caused mothers in Liguria to eat their babies in order to survive, as recorded by the Bishop of Milan. As if the cold, near-eternal twilight and famine weren't enough to knock over a polity, and sometimes it wasn't, there was a third factor to possibly emerge from the eruption of 536. A half-decade after the blast, in 541, the first instance of bubonic plague struck the Byzantine trading nexus of Pelusium in Egypt, probably originating somewhere in the eastern steppe of northern China. Although far from being a universally accepted theory, it is widely and credibly posited that the first onset of what became Justinian's plague in the early 540s was an indirect consequence of the volcanic eruption alluded to by our ancient sources. This chain of causality requires some level of explanation. Just how does a volcanic eruption in Iceland or possibly elsewhere across the world cause civilization-crippling plague in the distant Mediterranean? At first glance, the two disasters seem unconnected. However, of 7 severe volcanic eruptions taking place over the last 2,000 years, 6 in 44 BC, AD 626, 934, 1258, 1783, and of course 536, have resulted in a deadly period of epidemic disease in Europe, the Middle East, or both within 1 to 5 years. For this odd trend to be pure chance is, as prominent NASA scientist R.B. Stothers put it, a very unlikely coincidence. So what is going on here? The key to unpacking this mystery can be found in the calamitous volcanism-induced harvest failures which so often rock pre-industrial societies, the direct impacts of which we have already discussed. It is a simple truism that if we humans do not eat properly, our body's defenses do not function properly as a consequence. Crucially for this particular circumstance of 536, entire continents of people were almost certainly suffering from malnutrition, weakening millions of humans to an unprecedented pandemic which then spread like wildfire. In what comes close to a perfect storm, exposure to the plague flea-bearing rats may also have been drastically increased by the volcanic dust shroud. Decreasing temperatures actually lessen the development of these insectoid parasites, but said rats were conversely even more likely to be driven into people's homes by the cold. This brought the disease into closer contact with humans and provided a perfect environment, houses occupied by starving people weakened by lack of food, for the plague to make the short hop from animals to humans. Exacerbated by the Byzantine Empire's cosmopolitan nature, internal supply routes, trade, and the military ventures initiated by Emperor Justinian I, the plague which came to bear the great ruler's name infected vast swaths of the Middle East and southern Europe. Tax-paying citizens died in their millions, potentially bountiful land was left untilled, and Rome's remaining empire subsequently convulsed under the pressure. Up to half of the population died. The door of Justinian's Renaissance also slammed violently shut. Sapped to near breaking point, the emperor could not afford to decisively commit his armies to the conflict in Italy. This, accompanied by other military factors, led to a prolonged war of attrition. When that war was eventually concluded in the 550s, the territorial spoils were a desolated, depopulated wasteland, rather than the rejuvenating pot of gold that had previously served as the Roman Empire's beating heart. Although the devastation inflicted on the Byzantine Empire is by far the most famous of the plague's impacts, its Sassanid rival also suffered a less severe blow, in addition to a number of other states on its periphery. Further east still, shorter growing seasons and an inability to feed livestock probably resulted in seismic population movements and political instability within the eastern steppe area. Not only did this disruption result in the usurpation of the Roran steppe's dominance by the Gökturks in 551, but it also sent wave upon wave of nomads barreling towards the settled civilizations around them, searching for better land to occupy. One such confederation, the Avars, arrived north of the Black Sea by 550. In the Far East, tribes were shoved into China and initiated a new round of violent settlement and imperial defense. The mysterious but violent eruption of 536 wasn't allowed to settle before two further explosions followed in AD 540 and 547. Ice core evidence has shown that these blasts, together with the mass starvation and plagues they helped to spread, played a key role in plunging Europe into a century-long state of economic stagnation. Only in roughly 640 AD did this grim state of affairs come to an end, shown by a spike of airborne lead which signalled a resurgence in silver mining. It was the cataclysmic 536 event and its ominous darkness that led medieval historian Michael McCormick to remark how that curse year, often so bypassed in the popular historical narrative as nothing out of the norm, was the beginning of one of the worst periods to be alive, if not the worst year. All we can do is hope and act so that the coronavirus-ridden 2020 was not our 536, a terrible year that served as the herald of all the terrible years to come. Although a great many scientists support the point of view that the 536 eruption was the cause of the Great Struggle, others minimize its role. Summarizing their point of view is Anti-Ajava's statement that not only is there nothing in our evidence to suggest that the year 536 was a watershed moment between antiquity and the Middle Ages, it is also evident that although the cloud occasioned confusion and crop failure at the time of its appearance, its effects did not last long after it dissipated. It does not matter at the end of the day whether AD 536 was indeed just a relatively meaningless but lethal footnote, as Ajava suggests, or whether it was the watershed year in which the final embers of the ancient world were extinguished, providing the ashes for the medieval age to begin. It goes to show that sudden disasters, whether they take the form of earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, pandemics, or man-made hardships such as political crises or large-scale military conflict, can completely alter the world in which we live in a staggeringly short space of time. The late 520s and early 530s seems to be an unstoppable redemption of the Roman Empire under Justinian, but just a scant decade later, those lofty dreams were almost completely out of reach, and civilization seemed to be on the ropes. We always have more stories to tell, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.